All right, good afternoon, guys. This will be a pretty vanilla talk, and so we'll get out to the poll as soon as possible. I want to thank the Sanibel Symposium for giving us the opportunity to present today. So yeah, my topic is custodial HTK. What's in this stuff? So I do have a disclosure. As mentioned, I am with Essential Pharmaceuticals, but I'm going to talk to you today as a clinician. I used custodial HTK at Temple for a number of years and just really love this stuff. So I'm going to be talking to you as a clinician, but I will dive into the different components. So objectives today, I'm just going to talk about the overview of the mechanism of action of how custodial works. We're going to look at the role of each individual component, and then I'll try and tie it all together with some of the benefits that I feel that it has, and then some of the challenges as well. So here are the ingredients of HTK. There it is. There's a bag, 1 liter bag of crystalloid cardioplegia. This is a single dose crystalloid cardioplegia. So that's what we're going to be discussing today. And you can see the sodium, 15 millimoles, and potassium 10, magnesium 4. So you'll notice that these ion concentrations are very low, and low for a reason. We're going to discuss that. But when you convert the millimoles to actually milliequivalents to try and do, it's about half. So you're really looking at like a potassium level of 5 milliequivalents in 1 liter. So let's take a look at custodial. It's a paradigm shift. It's different than everything else that you're typically used to using. Everything else that you're using to stop the heart is relying on potassium to keep the heart in the depolarized state, as we're all well versed as clinicians. But with custodial, we're looking at relying on the low sodium concentration. So when we deliver custodial, as mentioned, and Kevin and Dr. Ganaiden did a phenomenal talk this morning, and they discussed this. As you deliver custodial nice and slow through the coronary circulation, you're going to create the gradient and draw those ions out of the extracellular space into the intracellular space. And so now you're void of enough positive ions to create an action potential. So you can see that, without enough of those positive ions of sodium, you're not going to be able to generate enough energy to create the action potential to have the heart start contracting. So the heart will just stay in that akinetic state as long as the cardioplegia is in the coronary system. So unless you get some kind of washout or you take the cross clamp off, it's going to stay in that state the entire time. Moving on to me, which is one of the most important components in the solution, and I think what separates custodial from every other myocardial protection strategy that's available on the market, is the histidine. And you may have gleaned from the first component slide that it's got a fair amount of histidine available in the solution. Now, histidine is an alpha-amino acid with an imidazole function group, and it does a great job of scavenging oxygen-free radicals, and it does also an equally good job of, taking care of the oxygen species that are present in the inflammatory response. So histidine does that pretty well, but what it really does well, and what I want to focus the benefits of histidine in this particular solution, is that it buffers the pH in the ischemic environment, and it does a really good job of that. And if you look at the chart here, you notice the pH range here, and this is ischemic time running down below, and this is the HTK line at the very top, and then right there in the middle is your St. Thomas solution, or plegisol as commonly referred to. And you can see that early in the ischemic phase, the pH is almost identical naturally at 0. But when you start getting out a little bit, maybe 30 minutes in, they start separating each other. You see the pH starts to become a little bit unstable. And then you come to the 120 mark, and you can see a huge difference in the pH. So that's why we can take custodial cardioplegia out 2 hours before another dose is necessary. It's hard to do that without the histidine in the solution. Here's another way of looking at that and supporting data. It's down here on this axis, you're looking at myocardial lactate content. And as that lactate content increases, here's the HTK, and then there's your St. Thomas down here. You can see again a nice smooth buffer so that it doesn't really change the pH all that dramatically. And then finally, this is in our brochure, this is as it relates to heart transplantation. We're looking at ATP levels and in an ischemic environment, and there's your time axis down here. And you can see that it does a nice job. Obviously, there's 6 hours. It doesn't start coming down sharply until about 3 or 4 hours. And so your ATP levels are pretty well preserved because of the histidine that's in the solution. So those were the poignant takeaways from those slides. Then we moved on to tryptophan. And Kevin went over this earlier today and did a great job. It's a membrane stabilizer. It's an anchoring protein, and it facilitates the smooth transition of ions from the extracellular to the intracellular space. And we need that smooth transition because we want that heart to arrest as soon as possible so that we're not putting that extra stress on the myocardium when we put the clamp on and create that ischemic environment. So tryptophan is important for that. And then finally, KETOGLUTARATE of the HTK. That's the energy source. It's necessary for the Krebs cycle. And it's going to be there in that solution when you take the cross clamp off. You're going to have that energy source ready to go. So as that heart, as you saw earlier, if you saw the breakfast talk this morning, which was terrific, as soon as you take the clamp off with HTK-treated patients, that heart snaps back very quickly. It could be with less than a minute in most times. And you need that energy source for that heart because it's gonna need that immediate energy. So, and it does a decent job at scavenging nitrogen as well. And then finally, we're just going to look at mannitol, and everybody in this room and online is well versed in mannitol and the effects. But what I find interesting is that it was purported to have the greatest effect at the beginning of an ischemic insult. And that's exactly what happens when we put the cross clamp on, is we're immediately creating that ischemic environment. And what a better time to have mannitol in the solution and deliver it at the beginning of an ischemic result. So I find that to be very beneficial to have in the solution. And we all know the renal, the oxygen-free radical scavenging. And then, once this solution gets back into the systemic system, it's going to do a good job of aiding the kidneys in, increasing urine output. So that mannitol is going to still be there when it comes systemically if you choose to let it get back into the system. So here's a fair comparison of just the base solutions prior to mixing. So you got custodial, plegiosol, and the original Del Nido formula, just the base solution by itself, pre-mixing. And you'll notice the low sodium ions as referenced earlier as compared. And then this is, like I said, more like 5 milliequivalents as opposed to 10 millimoles. And that's a realistic potassium level. And we all know if we've used plegiosol and we mix it 4-to-1, you've got to alter that. You've got to compound that. 16 is not enough to stop the heart. So it's really not 16 when you're actually giving cardioplegia. And then the osmolarity differences. And the osmolarity here allows us to pack that solution with histidine, with that high level of histidine of 198 millimoles. And then there's your tryptophan ketoglutarate. And then down here, you've got, obviously, it's been well talked about the effect of lidocaine in keeping the heart arrested. So what's it all mean? To me, what are the benefits as a clinician? Well, the low viscosity is a benefit. It's straight crystalloid. I've had multiple surgeons tell me the very first time they've ever used HTK that this is the coldest heart they've ever felt. And they've not needed topical solution, cooling solutions of any kind. So it really gets to the microvasculature quickly, and it gets that heart muscle nice and cold. It's got that low potassium level that we showed up in the graph. And you know, as we know, the kidneys really don't like high potassium. They struggle to excrete it, and that's not going to be an issue with HTK. And superior buffering capacity, that as we've well documented today, the histidine does a phenomenal job of buffering that pH in that ischemic environment. And this is important to me, and it should be important to clinicians. There's only one recognized protocol. There's only one way to give it. You give it 5 or 6 minutes, nice and slow at the beginning of the case, and then you're done. That's the protocol. There's no variations. It's not, should we give 500 today? Should we give this patient a liter tomorrow? There's just one way to give this. So it really adds uniformity, and you should have expected outcomes every time because you're giving it exactly the same way every time. No additives necessary whatsoever. So you take custodial out of the refrigerator, hang it, and you deliver it. And if you recall from this morning's talk, interestingly enough, the institution that did the study mostly used custodial on emergency cases. That was a higher volume compared to the Del Nido population. And this is a great reason. You hang and go. You don't have to worry about compounding or getting the mixture right or figuring out how much we're going to give today. It's perfect for that. Retrograde is likely unnecessary unless you, of course, have wide open AI, and in that case, you can give a retrograde, a resting dose, and give part of the formulary down the ostia. And then finally, and I heard this as a question this morning, we do have a way to address cold agglutins with custodial. So if you have that question, I have a protocol that I've used that works. So you can feel free to come talk to me. I'll be at the booth today if you have any questions about that. Some of the challenges, and these are obvious challenges, really. The first one is hemodilution. It's if you don't vent the custodial as it's gone through the coronary system, then it's going to come back into your reservoir and you're going to have to deal with it. And most likely that's going to be hemofiltration. So it's just one of the things that go hand in hand with custodial. And then hyponatremia. You're going to see a low sodium level in your first gas after you deliver custodial to your patient. You just will, because of the low sodium concentration and the volume as compared to the volume that was in your circuit. So you're going to see that. It will naturally resolve on its own without any intervention. But the nice thing is you can intervene, and there's no issue with that. You can choose to give bicarb. If that number is an issue to you, then go ahead, treat it with bicarb, or since you're already hemofiltering, you do some Z-buffing and use saline and naturally bring that sodium level up. So really, even though it is a challenge, it's not really a difficult one to manage. And then I guess finally, some takeaways. You may have heard of this as Brettschneider solution. It's been around for a very long time. This isn't brand new technology. It's just not, at least when I was in school back in the 80s, it wasn't taught. I mean, we just didn't hear much about custodial. And in the United States, it got immediate FDA designation as a device for heart and abdominal transplantation, and so it took off. But it actually was developed as a cardioplegia solution in the first place. It was developed by a scientist and a cardiac surgeon, and they did a terrific job formulating, and it's been used in over 1 million procedures, and it's well documented in both cardiac and transplantation, over thousands of publications. So tried, true, and trusted. And with that, I thank you for your time, and I will take any questions.